Hi, good morning, afternoon, whatever time it is in your zone. This is Writing Wednesday, and I'm Janet Fitch, and this is where we talk about all things writing. So, if you have questions for me today, put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer you. And if you have questions in between Writing Wednesdays, which is most of the time, um, please send them to me on my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I will be happy to answer your questions. I can do a whole Writing Wednesday around your question. And believe me, if you have a question, there are hundreds of people out there with the same question. Uh, so feel free to ask whatever. Hi, Amy. Feel free to ask whatever has been coming up for you. Um, and if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe to my channel. It encourages me to keep going. And we have a question today from another Amy, um, who asks, enjoys the channel. Excellent. And she has a question about there are certain details that come in stories and wanting to know specifically about, hi Jill, specifically about a Hemingway story called Hills Like White Elephants. But it's a more general question than that. It's a question about what writers put in, what they, how they consider what they're putting in, and how the reader is supposed to read it. This is definitely a channel for writers who are looking at this question from the other point of view, creating this material rather than from the reader's point of view. Um, but it goes both ways, you know. So, hi, Bozetta, good to see you. So, here's the question. In Hills Like White Elephants, this sentence has me bamboozled. Close against the side of the station, there was the warm shadow of a building, and a curtain, made of strings of bamboo beads, hung across the open door into the bar to keep out flies. Now, if anybody has read Hills Like White Elephants, it's told in a very oblique way. They never address the central problem of the story, which is a story about a sort of aimless couple, and the woman is discovered that she is pregnant. And it is a story about her needing to get an abortion and hoping that the guy is going to actually come through and decide to more formally commit to her. It's a really, really subtle story and very beautiful. Hemingway, when he's good, is very, very good. Hi, Amy. Okay, is this you, Amy, with the question? I'm glad that you're here. Hi, Lisa. Good to see you. Yeah, you figured it out. Very good. Um, so the question is about the the details of the unfolding scene. Um, Close against the side of the station was the warm shadow of a building and a curtain made of bamboo beads, hung across the open door into the bar to keep out flies. And the question is, I think it's the fetus, the warm shadow the warm shadow in the womb of the building that is the imagery that's telling us what the story is about, and a barrier, meaning the strings of bamboo beads, to keep things out, the flies. And what we're trying to keep out is the acknowledgement of what's going on in the story. But why might Hemingway have chosen string and bamboo beads? Porous boundaries, the word bamboo, obviously a poet here, is sharp, unforgiving, invasive. String is flimsy, easily broken. Attached strings can be detached. like a hanging decision. Um, is the whole story encapsulated in this single sentence? Was uncertainty embedded and ambiguity purposefully foreshadowed as the complex emotions of the woman, or am I overthinking this? Thoughts, Amy. Okay. Um, this is kind of is a reader question, how am I to interpret what I'm seeing? But let's turn it around from the writer's point of view. From the writer's point of view, the question is, hi Marie, good to see you. Um, from the writer's point of view, the difficulty, or not the difficulty, the issue is how much of this is unconscious? How much of it is the writer's painterly, experiential self creating a scene that feels correct to hold this incredibly tense with moment with a lot of unspoken thoughts and feelings, at very high conflict. So a quiet scene for a high conflict interaction where everything is going to be oblique. What we talk about is not really going to be what the issue is. And what kind of an environment will hold that kind of scene, that kind of conflict of people who are talking about anything but what they're talking about. It's a wonderful, wonderful scene it's all subtext. So in particular, let's talk about the elements of the senses that are going on here. So they're in shadow because they're in, I believe, Spain, which is a very hot country. So they're in shadow because they don't want to be baking out in the sun. So that's already, in a painterly way, a shadow is coming in. And whether he thought of it consciously or it just felt right to him, he is in a shadow is intruding onto the scene. A warm shadow because it's freaking hot. So, you're not cool in the shadow. The shadow is warm, and you could say that the shadow is alive because of the warmth of it. And they're not very warm. There's nothing warm going on between this man and this woman. So the fact that the shadow is warm is very interesting. Um, I am not going to say that he put this in consciously. Just like when we tear a poem apart and take a look at the component parts, everybody has to remember that the writer the poet in that case, does not put in things to be discovered. They feel their way to what the best image would be to reflect the feeling that they are trying to impart. And in a piece of fiction like this, where so much is going to remain unsaid, there is a very charged feeling about the scene, about the scenery, the the landscape that's going to hold this. The landscape is going to speak for these people a lot. Hills like white elephants. Even the title refers to the landscape and not the people, or the problem or the conflict. So the warm shadow is definitely, yeah, well, the child could link with the warm shadow. That was the question that Amy had. Exactly, Blair. But as a writer, when I look at this, I think about the symbolic meaning of the pregnant shadow. It's pregnant with meaning, at least. So, and there is a shadow that intrudes on the scene, and they are in the shadow, in the warm shadow. So, whatever's between them is still sort of alive. And, I don't know if I would say it's the child or just the end of this, whatever warmth is in that relationship that's been cast into the shadow. Um, but it presents a picture of a place where a quiet interaction between this man and woman can play out. The bamboo beads that keep the flies out. Um, as a writer, I wouldn't be so into the meaning of the bamboo as I would be the sound of the almost castanetish type of sound that a bamboo curtain would have when people go in and out of it. And to keep out flies is saying that it's a world that is uncontrolled and controllable, at least on the, when you're outside where these people are, that there are flies. So he's keeping it real. They're little buzzies. So to me, he's giving a sensual picture of place rather than a symbolic picture of place. Um, Bozena says, the most effective way of saying what cannot be said, the unsaid, is using that landscape, using sound, using smell, using whatever tools are at hand. So my guess is that the place is, this is just the way the bars are, is they have those curtains to keep the flies out. Um, but it also is that small little voice as they're trying to work out their unsaid problem. So to me, it's the small irritation of the audio. That's what it gives me. The clacking of beads too, and the train coming, going clacking too. Yeah, says Amy. And also the clacking is, it's like language that has not yet been clarified to actual speech. It's like a little nagging sound that of something that wants to be said that these people cannot yet express. Um, but the barrier to keep things out, they are out as well. They're not inside, they're out. So what is the barrier that's keeping them out? Um, it's this inchoate inability to actually say what they're saying, the little clacking, if you want a little interpretation, which prose doesn't really need that as much. Hi, Pope. Hope, how are you? Prose doesn't really need that kind of explication. Um, it's it's more how the scene is set in a way that heightens what is being done. So if any of the ideas that you had about uh, the string of bamboo beads, string and beads stringing along, it's very light. And beads, the clicking, but bamboo is hollow as well. And these people are dealing with something that is challenging their hollowness. And they're not rising to the occasion either. Yeah, chords would be a different kind of element. Um, and the string is flimsy, easily broken. It also moves with the wind, so more on the audio side. The word bamboo is sharp and invasive, you know. To you, I would say it would be, for me, the hollowness is what it seems to be emphasized here, but I'm going with the sound. that he likes that little bit, because then during the conversation, see, every bit of prose, fiction has layers to it. There's the character, what the characters want, what the characters are, the need of the characters. There's the need of the story, what needs to happen or be in there. And then there's the need of the writer, which is part of the mix. And I have a feeling that this bamboo curtain might click at certain places in the story that they can't, where there's a silence comes up between the man and the woman, and then the beads will speak. Somebody will come out to give them a beer, and then the audio will be filled in. So we know when there's small sounds in a scene, um, when when characters fall silent. Hi, Brenda. When characters fall silent, these small sounds come forward. So by giving himself that curtain, Hemingway is giving himself some, uh, I don't want to say filler, but dimensionality that he can turn to to show a silence. You never have to say they fell silent. You just have them say something, and then you can hear the beads rattling after the lady went back in after giving them the beer. It emphasizes the silence. Same thing with flies buzzing. Um, hung, the curtain hung the way they're hanging in trying to make this decision without ever really talking about what they're talking about. Maybe, maybe, or it could be just serendipity that he came up with the perfect word for what was happening with them, because that's a word choice, not just beads, but anything hanging would, with a pendulum sort of effect, not laundry hanging. Um, but this thing of being outside and being kept out is really interesting and does underline where they're at. Um, is the whole story encapsulated in this single sentence? Um, I think these things are so unconscious in the writer that I think the mood and perhaps the basic issues of the story are in that sentence. Is it the first sentence? I don't remember my hills like white elephants. Um, but it's definitely setting a stage. He's decided to have it there and not at a party after a bullfight, and not in the morning after you know, he just wakes up and she comes in with coffee and a donut. They're at the station, correct? Um, close against one side of the station. So there's this pull of travel, of getting ready to go somewhere. And are they going together? Are they going separately? And what is the destination? Is sort of implicit there. That's having a meeting at the station adds a little urgency that a meeting at the church or a meeting at the post office just doesn't have. Somebody's going somewhere. It's in the subtext. Blair says, do you sort of generate a bunch of writing and then pick what feels like it fits? I keep trying to generate details that have a subconscious impact, and that seems like the wrong approach. I do, I will sometimes go back and um, heighten landscape features that speak to the scene. Um, sometimes I see it right away. I see it as I set the scene. I decide, is this a night scene? Is it a day scene? Is it indoor? Is it outdoor? If I've had a scene in a bar before this and a scene in the bar after this, I generally won't have that scene in a bar, you know. Um, I will make an effort to set it somewhere else. And you do want to set the mood. I mean, that's the whole purpose of landscape. You know, what is the mood of the scene? What is the feeling you want your reader to have as they enter, as they settle into the scene or chapter? Um, is it, if I'm meeting somebody at the tinsmiths in the bazaar and hubbub, 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 I'm going to get a feeling of kind of anxiety and chaos, uh, life, noise, confusion, commerciality, trade. It's going to be something about trade, money, agreements, commerciality, if you know, and a confused setting where there could be misunderstanding because there's so much going on. In this, you know, if I want to set a really quiet scene where two people who do not say what they really think, everybody's playing the angles, everybody's playing the cards close to the chest. I want to, you know, I can see having a very quiet um, place where you could hear a fly buzzing, where you could hear the clink of bamboo, because it accentuates the tension of people not saying what they mean. Let's see what happens here. So, um, was uncertainty embedded and ambiguity purposely foreshadowed as the complex emotions? Yes, I think that Hemingway did want uncertainty and ambiguity and the tension of even of very small moments, small sounds in a very quiet, restrained scene, and the proximity of the station. That the train's is gonna arrive, whatever they decide, they've got to decide it now. It's the urgency is built in that way. But I think that people don't generally, I don't, and I have a feeling that most writers do not think of how to symbolize so much as they feel it. They feel that this is where it should be, you know, where this should take place. You know, an older person is kind of really oppressed by, you know, unfolding age. Might You might have a scene at a kiddie carnival, you know, which indicates the nostalgia of for that kind of life. But generally, it's not an entirely conscious choice. It arises from the feeling you want from the scene, and what you might even not know what the issues actually are. You just feel that you want it to set at a kiddie carnival. It just seems like it would be where, you know, Julius would wander. Um, I think that I'm not an intellectual writer, and I think that um, I shouldn't say most, but I think that it is more usual that writers they feel it rather than thinking what should, but you can train it. You can train that feeling, absolutely. And there is something that they call in the writing trade, the objective correlative. Um, and I believe it was about Tennessee Williams or about O'Neill, a playwright. But an objective correlative is a thing, an object, it could be a place, it could be all kinds of things, that speaks for or speaks to the character's state of mind and the circumstance and the problem. Um, and that is an exercise that I certainly recommend to one and all, which is the doing your character in, say, 10 objects. I do this as a class when I'm working with students. Um, it's like do your character in the language of plants. What are they in terms of plant? Are they, a dying philodendron in the corner? Are they a redwood? Are they an oak? Are they, start thinking of your character, what would be in the room of somebody who's dying of cancer, so that you don't have to describe the cancer, you just describe the room. What would be in that room? What would be in a scene where somebody is trying to decide whether they are going to keep a child or terminate? And they don't really talk very openly. How would you set that scene? So I don't think that necessarily the scene that Hemingway came up with is the only one. I'd say don't try to kill yourself trying to manufacture the perfect vessel for your scene, but more think in terms of what should be there, what shouldn't be there. What are you feeling? How do you feel that person? Um, so it's a wonderful exercise if you take 10 different kinds of characters in 10 different kinds of situations. Let me find one of those exercises if I can on my computer here, seeing I have this compendium. Let's see if I can find something for you to see. I'm not very good at sharing screen, but I can. No, 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 no. That's not what I want. There it is. Good God. Okay. So this is part of doing landscape. And let's see if I can find the objective correlatives. Okay, here we go. So an objective correlative is an object that stands for a person or embodies a situation in this case. So here are some objective correlatives that you can give it a try. Give me an objective correlative for a woman with cancer. Like what's in her room? How would you depict it? Overgrown ivy trying to force its way into the room in the window. I mean, to me, that would be an objective correlative. In a way, it's kind of a metaphor, right? Try this: a woman in a bad marriage. What are some objects? What are some things you would see in the room that would tell you that woman was in a bad marriage? How about an old man with a young lover? What's in his apartment? What's in his room? So tell us without telling us directly. You can allow the landscape to speak for that. Try a poor boy in love with a rich girl. What would you see there? What stands for him in that? Do a character in 4 objects. um, a woman dying at home, a spoiled child, a dreamy young girl in love, a sour old man, a mother on the verge of a breakdown, a secretly pregnant woman, an unsuccessful actor. So, what's in their world? What's in that room? And this is the kind of, when you do exercises like that, it strengthens the muscle of being able to imagine this, the environment speaking for the characters. So we do things like describe someone, plants and gardens. You know, she's like a wild garden, you know, untamed, but you know, lush and blah blah blah. So then, if you're going to have her, you can have her in that garden, and you don't have to say that about her. You can just be there. Describe someone in the language of a room of a house. You know, God, all the great writers do this. You know, Faulkner, my God. Describe someone in the language of food and drink. You know, are they a porterhouse steak, or are they a can of diet drink, or are they a can of an energy drink? Um, Describe them in the language of architecture. You know, are they Art Deco? Are they shabby chic? I hate shabby chic as a, you know, pretty shitty language, but you know, are they Victorian? You know, solid and ugly. Um, Describe someone in the language of the weather. I mean, there's a wonderful line from the opening of, I believe it's The End of the Affair by Graham Greene, where he describes an ugly Victorian building that had nevertheless survived the war. Um, and it's an objective correlative. Um, Describe someone in the language of the weather. What kind of weather is your person? So you can have, you start doing this as a, you start doing this as a, just a way of life. Do these exercises, and you will strengthen that muscle. Um, so let's see. Um, let's see. You do it when your text happens to be flat, Bozena said. Yeah, especially, you know, to remember that you can use the landscape. And I always try to use the landscape. Um, a tree cutting crew outside the house, you know, somebody dying in the house. That's very good. Um, uh, Marie says, do you think it makes a difference writing or using a laptop to practice these exercises? No, I don't think it makes any difference. I usually do exercises by hand just because, um, you know, I can go and sit down and, you know, write. It gets me away from the computer a little bit, but I don't think it makes any difference. Um, so there's a game that will strengthen this. I don't know if anybody has studied with me, but there's a game we play called Smoke. It was a game the surrealists play. I love surrealist games because they were all about defamiliarization, making the world new again. Um, and it's called Smoke. So you pick a celebrity, or you pick a book, or you pick a character, or you pick something, somebody, and the other people try to guess who it is. And you start with, you know, if you were a smoke, what kind of smoke would you be? You know, would you be pipe smoke? Would you be, you know, a clove beady? It's a different person. Pipe, you know, cherry tobacco is different than a clove beady already. You start, and you see, if when you do the game, you narrow it down pretty fast. You get the character pretty fast, unless people have very little in common. Um, I have a, you know, like if they're smoking, I have a character in The Revolution of Marina M. the father, Marina's father, who smokes cherry tobacco. And he doesn't have to be present in the scene. If you smell cherry tobacco, the father's been there. So that's smoke. Uh, so it's what if you were a smoke, what kind of smoke would you be? If you were a food, what kind of food would you be? And then, if you were a kind of music, what kind of music would you be? If you were an automobile, and by the time you usually have 10 answers, the people have guessed who it is. Because we know the feeling of things. Um, somebody who's cornbread is very different than somebody whose oysters Rockefeller, you know? Um, but you think of the landscape as well. Where are your characters? What's the feeling of that landscape? What's the feeling of that object? What's the feeling of the clacking, the hollow clacking of the bamboo beads, the little buzzing fly? What part of speech would you be? That's really an interesting one. Hi, Wendy. Good to see you. Um, so I really recommend strengthening your sensitivity to the possibilities of objects and locations. Where would you put a scene like that? I mean, hills like white elephants, those people could have been in bed smoking the cigarette with the ashtray on his chest, having the same conversation that never goes anywhere kind of conversation. But having it at the station really puts pressure on it. And then the little sounds that you can fill out, and you can have distance and close up, and setting things in a room is not usually as interesting as the outdoors, or at least a room with a window, looking out at something, because you can go outside as well as in. You can get the distance on things, um, and using all the senses, helps you build these scenes. Um, Anything else I can tell you about this? Um, A. Peterson has a question. Uh, I did a Writing Wednesday um, last time, a couple of times ago, about the screenplay. And this is a screenplay about White Oleander made into a movie, the Hollywood scene. I didn't enter the Hollywood scene, I just wrote the novel. And what was the dynamic between me and the screenwriter? No, there was no relationship. I sold it, and the screenwriter wrote it, and sometimes the director or the producer would ask me questions, and I would quietly talk to them. But there's no contact. There was no contact between me and the woman who adapted White Oleander. Um, but that was something that every scene was set in a certain place because I wanted it to work for me in certain ways. Do you set it inside, outside? What sounds are present? What plants? What do I want to say about these people? Um, Giving one of the foster mothers in White Oleander had a turquoise house, and I believe plastic flowers in the ground. And that's a different person than somebody who lives in kind of a groovy hillside shack, or who lives in a little bungalow in the middle of, you know, real Hollywood, which is down market. Um, you want to feel for people, where they live, where are you going to set those scenes, and doing the exercises is super, super, super useful, because then when it's time to actually do it in your book, um, you're already thinking in those terms. Any other questions about generating objects and details that have a subconscious impact? Um, as Blair was talking about earlier, Um, sometimes she says, do you sometimes generate a bunch of writing and then pick what it feels like it fits? Yeah, sometimes you'll just have written the scene and you know vaguely, I'm going to set this in a bar, but it's still happy hour because they're broke. So this is their entertainment for the evening. Okay, so you know that. But, and then you do your scene and you realize it's sort of stripped down. It's still sort of flat. It's, you know, it's not fully embodied. There's no sounds, there's no smells, there's no texture. And then I will go back and work on that. Or I'll have a draft. And then as I go back through the draft, I'll be asking myself, you know, there's no sound, there's no smell, there's no texture. Sound is especially important to me. These little sounds just really help. Is there weather? Is there shadow? Where's the light coming from? And being more physical with your work. Um, you know, Hemingway, very physical, um, because that's what you've got, especially when people aren't talking and they're not communicating. Is you need the body, you need what people are doing. They're drinking their beer, they're peeling the label of the bottle, um, you know, they're looking away or they're looking towards or they're looking out. What are they seeing? So you don't have to say she looked out. You know, if you're her, it's like, you know, her eyes followed the ridge of the hills. Um, Anything else? Um, well, I think that we have taken the lid off of Hills of White Elephants, and we can look at any story like that, you know, and note, like Xerox, if you don't want to write in your books, Xerox, a you know, group of pages, and then go into it and take a look at how it's set and where it's set, and what the author is paying attention to heighten the subject of the scene. Um, that's a great and useful weightlifting exercise. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Amy, for the question. And thanks all of you for joining us. And if you have not subscribed to my channel, please do. It encourages me to keep going. And Bozena says, off to Hemingway now. Well, enjoy. Okay, thank you. Bye.